Shotgun people. Okay, here we go. Closing arguments from the Weasel, aka D.A. Binger.
It is that the proponent of a proposition is entitled to give the first and the last argument. So Mr. Binger will address you first on behalf of the state, then Mr. Richards addressing you on behalf the Mr. Binger, while you were out of the room, appropriate, around noon. Pick up this after 4 more minutes. And which one do you want?
Sister's pointer.
The sister's pointer? Okay. Hey, we'll take a vote right now. Supposing the case arguments are finished at 4:30, 5 o'clock. And we'll be working well to get there. How many would like to begin their deliberations tonight and stay until a later hour? Or how many would like to come back and start fresh in the morning? And the cutoff point would be, say we got finished by 4 and I give you the case. The latest I would let you go if you didn't want to stay late would probably be about 5 o'clock. So I don't know how much you get done, but you'd have the option to get started this today. So how many would want to continue on today? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 out of, what do we got, 18? How many would rather come back fresh tomorrow? Knowing that some of you aren't coming back. Okay, and of course, as always, I'll make the final decision.
Thank you, Judge. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to assure you that everything that the judge just read to you, you'll get a copy of, so you'll have a chance to look it over yourself. You don't have to memorize everything he just told you. I think it's no surprise that this is a case that there's a lot of noise and a lot of static surrounding it. So what I'd like to do at the beginning is crystallize it in a nutshell for you and keep it as simple as possible.
This guy ain't making nothing simple or he loses.
Case in which a 17-year-old teenager killed 2 unarmed men and severely wounded a third person with an AR-15 that did not belong to him. This isn't a situation where he was protecting his home or his family. He killed people after traveling here from Antioch, Illinois, and staying out after a citywide curfew.
Your Honor, I'm objecting. There's no curfew charge anymore. There's no gun charge.
Oh, good objection. You go, boy.
Although he claimed
There's no charge, but and there has been some discussion about the lawfulness of the curfew, not in this case, but elsewhere. But there had been a curfew announced. That does not mean that it was technically lawfully a legal curfew, but there had been an announced curfew, so I'll leave it at that.
and it was a curfew that all the rest of us here in Kenosha were aware of, and I think most reasonable people obeyed.
The whole city was burning out. The cops were all on the outside while they were burning and looting, and most people obeyed. Are you serious? Man, he couldn't get 1 minute in without lying.
Although the defendant claimed to be protecting a business that he wasn't familiar with.
Claimed?
The actual killings in this case had nothing to do with that. And he also spent the entire evening lying about the fact that he was an EMT.
Calling him a liar. You gotta get him believing that he's a liar.
None of the things that I just told you are in doubt in this case. So when we think about the defendant, I'd like you to consider, as you think about this case, what his true motivations were. Was this a situation where he sincerely cared about CarSource, even though he'd never heard of it, never bought anything there, never worked there, and not even its owners were out there that night protecting it? Was he genuinely interested in helping people? He ran around with an AR-15 all night and lied about being an EMT. Does that suggest to you that he genuinely is there to help?
Doesn't mention that he helped people, that he put out fires. What a weasel.
He's not there for the same purpose as the protesters.
Oh, and what were the protesters there for? To burn, loot, destroy? Are you kidding me? He's trying to say the protesters were there for a good reason? Oh my.
So why was he there that night? When you think about these things, I think there are some things that we can all agree on. In America, it's hard these days. People are polarized, and there's a lot of political issues back and forth. And the judge has made it clear this case is not about politics.
Even though you tried to make it about politics and discredit a guy because he didn't freaking believe with your left-wing politics.
There is common ground here. We have all agreed, and I asked you this 2 weeks ago today. Raise your hand if you agree life is more important than property. And
hey, he's using raise my hand. You can't say that. That's my line, you big dummy.
all of you raised your hand. We also agree that no one person's life is more valuable than another. You don't get to kill someone simply because they're a drug dealer. You don't weigh a pastor's life over a teacher's life. You don't weigh a police officer's life over an engineer's life.
What about a kid out there giving medical aids life over idiots who are beating the shit out of him?
All life is sacred. I think we can also agree that we shouldn't have 17-year-olds running around our streets with AR-15s, because this is exactly what happens. And finally, I want you to keep in mind that we've all read stories and heard about heroes that step in to stop an active shooter or to give their life to save others. In fact, many people in Wisconsin went out and got carrying concealed weapon permits just so that they could be there in case there was an active shooter.
See, he's got a side just in case there's some gun people on there, so he doesn't appear, even though he is attacking guns, he doesn't want to appear to attack guns.
And wanting to stop them. So when you consider this case, look for the truth. So many people look at this case and they see what they want to see. They have a preconceived notion and they tailor the facts to fit whatever they believe.
You mean like you? What the?
And you all agreed to keep an open mind. You all told us you didn't have any of those preconceived notions. Now you've heard the evidence, and it's time to search for the truth. So consider, for example, whether or not it's heroic or honorable to provoke and shoot unarmed people. Consider whether it makes someone a hero when they lie about being an EMT. I think all of us are familiar with someone who does the sorts of things that the
Lie and lying. What is that, the third or fourth time now already, and he's only 2 minutes in?
defendant has done. They enjoy the thrill of going around and telling people what to do without the courage or the honor to back it up,
You mean like you?
and without the legal authority to do so. And when you think about the defendant's behavior in this case, contrast it with Anthony Huber, a man who was there because he knew Jacob Blake, who carried his skateboard everywhere, and who rushed towards danger to save other people's lives.
He just called a guy who was already convicted, couldn't have a gun, carried a gun illegal, went up, pointed, and grabbed a loaded gun, and then got shot. And suddenly he's a hero. Are you kidding me?
So when I talk to you here in my closing argument, I'm going to focus first on the murders that the defendant committed. Second, I'm going to address some background issues, give you some context, and talk about some of the things that I don't think are relevant to this case. And finally, I'm going to tie it all into the jury instructions that the judge just gave you. As prosecutors in this case, my colleague Jim Krause and I have tried to present you with all of the relevant evidence.
Jim and I. By calling him by his first name, he's personalizing him. He's making them seem like real people.
That we think you should consider in this case. And I told one of you in jury selection that at the end of this, you would be the expert. You would have all the information. You would be the one who would know all about this case and make that decision. And that's what we've tried to do. So let's go to August 25th, 2020. The defendant came from outside our community, carrying a gun that wasn't his, because he expected and anticipated violence that night. And he pretended to guard what turned out to be an empty building, owned by people he'd never even met, while fraudulently
Never met? Your Honor, misstates evidence. We've got a picture of him with him. He's misstating the evidence. He did meet him.
claiming all night long to be an EMT. There were a lot of people out that night. Some people stayed home protecting their homes and their families. Others went to their businesses, boarded them up, and protected them. And a lot of those people had weapons. A lot of them had guns. There were other people who came along to protect Car Source or Ultimate Gas or other businesses. And many of them were armed with AR-15s, just like the defendant.
And none of them were attacked and hit in the head with a skateboard and rocks and attacked and chased and knocked on the ground and had their guns grabbed. But we'll just leave that out for you dumb jurors.
In fact, you're going to see a video, and you've already seen it, of a clash between people with AR-15s at Ultimate Gas and other folks that are, I guess, protesters. And there's people getting in people's faces, there's yelling, there's shouting, there's even shoving. And yet, in this entire sequence of events, from the shooting of Jacob Blake on Sunday, August 23rd, 2020, all the way after that, everything this community went through, the only person who shot and killed anyone was the defendant. Yes, there was property damage. No one's here to defend that. No one's here to tell you it's okay to commit arson or looting. No one's here to tell you it's okay to be rioters. I'm not defending any of that. You know, because you've been told in the testimony, I'm prosecuting Joseph Ziminski for arson. That's not okay. But what you don't get to do is kill someone on the street for committing arson. So let's keep that in mind.
Actually, arson, if he's burning down a house with somebody in it and endangering lives and starting a fire, deadly force would be authorized. But once again, he's just misstating and lying.
We're talking about the people involved in this case. So let's begin with the provocation and the murder of Joseph Rosenbaum, because it's all captured on video. As the defendant and Mr. Rosenbaum arrive at the 63rd Street Car Source, Mr. Rosenbaum is ahead of the defendant.
Telling a story, which I guarantee you, he will tell it wrong.
And as you see in the FBI video, when Mr. Rosenbaum starts to run, the defendant starts to run as well, at the same time, as if he's pursuing him. Mr. Rosenbaum could not possibly have known the defendant is behind him. There's no indication in this record that he knew the defendant was there. It's not an ambush. It's not a situation where he goes there and lays in wait for the defendant. The defendant arrives at that location.
It's exactly what it was. He hid, he ducked down, and he ran behind him and then tried to take his gun.
And you hear him yell, friendly, 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 because he's aware of the fact that the people that he's about to confront are hostile to him. And I'm going to show you in a moment the video in which the first thing he does when he arrives at that location is drops the fire extinguisher that he's holding in his left hand so he can raise the gun with his right and left hands and pointed. This is when you hear someone, I think the testimony is Rosenbaum, it's not clear to me, but either way, yell gun, gun, gun. And then Mr. Rosenbaum charges around.
I think it's Rosenbaum. He doesn't think that. He wants the jury to think that. There's no evidence at all that Rosenbaum said this. Didn't come up in trial, and nobody has said that Rosenbaum yelled that. So he just made it up to plant a seed in the jury's mind. What a weasel.
To try and stop the defendant from pointing his gun or shooting anyone. So let's take a look at some of that video. This is Exhibit 73, the full drone video. And as we've pointed out to you before, and Jim will point out to you here in a second on the screen, when the defendant originally arrives at that scene, the first thing you see him do is drop the fire extinguisher and point his weapon at people. And then the chase occurs right after that. And you're going to see that entire sequence of events here on the full drone video.
He should say, Jim, my secretary.
The defendant turns as he's being pursued and points the gun at Mr. Rosenbaum. And then as he enters the area between the parked cars, he slows and turns, and before Mr. Rosenbaum can even come close, he fires at him, shooting and knocking him to the ground. Now I'm going to show you the slowed down and zoomed in video of the defendant when he first gets there. And Mr. Krause is going to help me by directing your attention on the larger screen here to exactly where you will see the defendant.
I'm assuming he's talking this area. We've only seen it 100 times.
I'm going to replay it a few times so you can see quite clearly that the defendant sets the fire extinguisher on the ground with his left hand and then brings his left hand over.
Notice he's using the word sets, sets. He's going to bring up later that he lied under oath and said he dropped it. So this is planting the seed for his later. I guarantee you that's what he's going to do.
Over to the gun and raises it and points.
This video is worthless. I don't see shit.
Guys, check the gun. Make sure it's empty. This is the provocation. This is what starts this incident. The defendant rushes in and immediately points the gun. And as you'll see in a little bit, Mr.
I think he could object misstating evidence there. Earlier in the night, he told him he was going to kill him. This was not the start of the event. This guy had been stalking and getting pissed off at him all night. This is not the start of the event.
Rosenbaum doesn't take kindly to people pointing guns. I don't think anyone does. That's not unusual. No one wants to have the gun pointed at them, and no one wants to watch anyone else do this to someone else. We have the gun. It is in evidence as exhibit number 28. I'm having the detectives check it to make sure that it is safe.
Oh, because he cares about you. Because he's a good guy.
The defendant comes running in and drops the fire extinguisher on the ground like this. And then raises his left hand to the gun and points. This is what we see in the video. Him putting the fire extinguisher on the ground and then raising the gun.
Your Honor, I'm going to check. He's facing the wrong direction.
That's an argument.
Okay.
I'd like to actually have, well, I'll leave it alone.
So what you see in that video is his left arm.
Good. Every time they object, it pisses him off. So I hope he objects more because he gets pissed. You hear him mouth off back to him?
Reaching for the gun, holding it up. You can see it again on the video here. His left arm reaching up towards the gun. That is what provokes this entire incident. And one of the things to keep in mind is that when the defendant provokes the incident, he loses the right to self-defense. You cannot claim self-defense.
That's why he should say this did provoke it. There was earlier contact and the threat. Come on, guy.
Against a danger you create. That's critical right here. If you're the one who's threatening others, you lose the right to claim self-defense.
Remember, what he says isn't law and isn't evidence. But this is how they manipulate jurors. They make them think that he's quoting law and he's saying the right stuff. And since they're the last ones that get to talk to the jury, guess what the jury remembers?
Then we have the chase that occurs after that. And we have taken that drone video and we have slowed down portions of that chase for you. So what we have right here on the screen, this is Exhibit 84. And this is the middle portion of that incident. And you can see Mr. Rosenbaum chasing after the defendant, throwing that plastic bag, and then the defendant turns and points the gun back at Mr. Rosenbaum. And this is the moment in time when Mr. Rosenbaum essentially does sort of a little hop with both of his hands in the air. And the defendant has testified. He saw at that moment that there was nothing in the defendant's hand, or in Mr. Rosenbaum's hands. He was unarmed. There's the defendant turning and pointing the gun. Mr. Rosenbaum leaps, his hands out to the air, and then watch here at the end.
He turned and pointed, but he didn't fire, did he? He still tried to get away. He was still running. He was still being pursued and chased.
This is where the shooting occurs. Mr. Rosenbaum is not even within arm's reach when the first shot occurs. I'll play that again. The defendant is pointing the gun at Mr. Rosenbaum. Mr. Rosenbaum raises his arms off to the side. The defendant approaches these cars and slows down, and then turns and shoots Mr. Rosenbaum. Finally, I'm going to play you Exhibit 86. And slowed down. Here's the defendant running in between those parked cars, slowing down, and you can see just how close, or rather how far away, Mr. Rosenbaum was when the defendant shot him.
Pretty damn close to me. He pretty much grabbed that barrel, if you ask me. Hell, he almost hit the guy in the shoes.
You can see from this video that Mr. Rosenbaum is not even within arm's reach of
Really?
the defendant when the first
He's not within arm's reach? He's literally almost touching his freaking leg.
shot goes off. The defendant fires 4 shots in quick succession. And I'll come back to this in a moment, but you'll note during this entire sequence, it's the defendant who chooses where to go. He's the one who decides to run where he runs. And he slows down right as he gets to these parked cars. That's what allows Rosenbaum to get closer. We've seen this on
Oh, so he set him up. He made him chase him, and then he made him chase him to this area just so he could shoot him. Yeah, that's reasonable.
the aerial footage from the FBI, and I want you to see that perspective as well. In the same direction as Mr. Rosenbaum, this is where the pointing occurs in the direction of the Zeminskis. You can see Joshua Zeminski's right there on the screen. I'm going to put the cursor over where the Zeminskis are. They're right in there. The defendant is pointing his gun right here, and he's pointing it in the direction of the Zeminskis, because they're standing next to that car. And then the chase occurs. Now what's interesting to me is, watch when the crowd starts to run. The crowd's already starting to run here even before the defendant has fired a shot. That's likely because they heard the first shot from Joshua Zeminski, and the crowd starts to run away. The defendant has testified that that shot from Mr. Zeminski had nothing to do with his decision to kill Joseph Rosenbaum. And I'll come back to that in a second.
Actually, he never said he killed him. He didn't make a decision. Misstates the evidence.
Finally, I'm going to show you this incident from the perspective of Drew Hernandez, because he is behind all of this, and then he comes upon Mr. Rosenbaum's body. Is that audio playing? Is the audio playing? Is it coming? I'm not sure why you're not hearing audio on that. Is Brian around? He's not. All right. Thanks, Brian, please.
I mean, we've seen all these so many times.
At this point, the defendant has shot and killed Joseph Rosenbaum, and Mr. Rosenbaum is laying face down. That's where he falls. Richie McGinnis actually rolls him over after trying to stem the bleeding here. You can see in the foreground that plastic bag that Mr. Rosenbaum threw on the ground. I don't think there's any dispute. There was nothing harmful in that bag. It was a clear bag containing some
That's bullshit. They never found the bag or proved what was in the bag. He can't start telling them what's in the damn bag.
that Mr. Rosenbaum threw on the ground. I don't think there's any dispute. There was nothing harmful in that bag. It was a clear bag containing some clear items.
Objection, there is a dispute what's in that bag.
Then you can make that dispute in your argument.
Oh, I guess the defense said something about the bag, and he just kind of fronted him off. Well, you can make that in your argument. Wow. I'm surprised the judge didn't step in on that one.
It's argument, and you'll be allowed to respond.
You can see in this video the crowd is attempting to save Mr. Rosenbaum's life. So, we have shown you the FBI video. The defendant admitted
Oh, if the FBI made it, it must be real, and it must be good, and it must be accurate, right?
that during this entire incident he knew that Joseph Rosenbaum was unarmed.
He did
I'm going
not
to come
know
back to
that.
this in a little while, but there's this alleged threat that Mr. Rosenbaum made earlier
Oh, now it's an alleged threat.
in the evening to kill the defendant. I will debunk that. That did not happen.
How does he know? He can't say that.
It is the one fact in this case the defendant wants you to believe that there's no video of. And in fact, I have the video of the entire incident. I've played it for you, and I'll show it to you again. There's no threat. There's also no evidence that Mr. Rosenbaum ever wanted the defendant's gun. He never said, I'm going to take your gun. He never said, I want your gun. There's no indication of that. Dr. Kelly has testified that the first shot that the defendant fired at Joseph Rosenbaum hit the victim in the right pelvis, fracturing it. Mr. Rosenbaum was incapacitated at that point. He is, whatever threat he might have posed, it's over. There is no further threat. He is falling to the ground.
That is such a misrepresentation of what happened. He fired 4 shots in less than 1 second. I think he said it was 0.75 seconds. 4 shots in 0.75, and he's making it seem like the first shot, Kyle decided to shoot him 3 more times for GP. I hope the jury sees what a liar he is.
And the defendant doesn't stop after that first shot. He tracks Mr. Rosenbaum's body all the way down, firing 3 more shots. A second shot, which goes through Mr. Rosenbaum's hand, and then a third and fourth shot, one that grazes the right scalp and one that goes right into Mr. Rosenbaum's back. And that is the kill shot. That is the one that took Mr. Rosenbaum's life. There is no evidence that Mr. Rosenbaum was reaching for the defendant's gun. And after that first shot, there's no way Mr. Rosenbaum could have taken that gun even if he wanted to. He is already falling to the ground. He is helpless. He is vulnerable. And as I said, the kill shot is the one to the back. This is that wound. Dr. Kelly down towards the right lower back area. To the hand, there's been a lot of testimony about this wound. This is one in which the evidence suggests that Mr. Rosenbaum's hand was most likely turned in this position, palms outward with his thumb to the ground, when the bullet goes through the area in between.
Just like he's grabbing for the barrel right there.
His middle finger and his ring finger, and penetrates the lower knuckle of the middle finger and the index finger before exiting. Dr. Kelly testified there's soot in that area, suggesting that the hand was close to the end of the defendant's barrel of the AR-15 at the time of that shot. The defense wants you to believe it's there because Mr. Rosenbaum is deliberately reaching for the gun. Well, that doesn't make any sense. First of all, this occurs after Mr. Rosenbaum has been shot in the hip and has got a fractured pelvis at that point. He is falling. He is not able to walk. He's probably not even able to control much of his movements at this point. When you're reaching for that gun, this is not the way you're going to do it. This is not going to be effective. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, to the extent Mr. Rosenbaum's hand ever got close to the end of the defendant's gun, it was completely inadvertent, not at all intentional.
And why was it up? And why was Rosenbaum there? And why did he chase him? And why was he reaching at all? What, he wanted to touch it because he didn't have his own little AR? What, Mr. Weasel?
Now, we've heard a lot about the Zeminskis in this case, and I just want to carve them out of this case right now because it's a red herring. It has nothing to do with any of this. There's been some focus on that because I think the defense was hoping.
For y'all don't know what a red herring is, they used to teach, when they were teaching dogs to track, they would throw out a red herring to distract the dog. And so a red herring always became a distraction after that. That's where the term came from, in case anybody wonders.
They could work this into their self-defense claim and make an argument that that first shot by Joshua Zeminski somehow made the defendant fear for his life. Unfortunately, the defendant wasn't on board with that because in his testimony, he told you that that shot had nothing to do with his thought process. It didn't affect him in any way. He said he didn't think the shot came from Joseph Rosenbaum. He knew Joseph Rosenbaum was unarmed, and he admitted to me, you can't kill Joseph Rosenbaum for something Joshua Zeminski did.
Now, had he not taken a stand, he could not have said this. This is why I tell people don't talk to the police and don't give a statement. Because look how easy it is for him to twist that around, and that's not what Kyle was trying to convey on a stand when he was getting grilled, and isn't that true, and blah, 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 blah. And look how he twisted it.
So let's just carve Joshua Zeminski out of this case. I'll deal with him on his arson trial in January, but until then, it doesn't factor into any of the decisions the defendant made. And in fact, as you see on the FBI video, the Zeminskis continue walking straight on down the sidewalk. They don't pursue the defendant. They don't threaten the defendant in any way. Now, the defense wants you to think Joseph Rosenbaum was there to attack the defendant. We'll never know what Joseph Rosenbaum was thinking because the defendant killed him.
Oh my God, are you seriously going to freaking Footloose or whatever the hell this is?
So we're just guessing. But let's assume for a minute, yeah, Joseph Rosenbaum is chasing after the defendant because he wants to.
This is like, are you kidding me? We're going to the movies now for I hope some jury just goes, are you serious, dude? You're trying to get us to side with you because you're showing a movie clip that we all might have seen?
Do some physical harm to him. He's an unarmed man. This is a bar fight. This is a fist fight. This is a fight that maybe many of you have been involved in. Two people, hand to hand, we're throwing punches, we're pushing, we're shoving, we're whatever. But what you don't do is you don't bring a gun to a fistfight. What the defendant wants you to believe is that because he's the one who brought the gun, he gets to kill. So I want you to contrast this. Two different scenarios. One scenario where there's two guys who are throwing punches at one another like a bar fight. I think we'd all agree you can't kill someone. You can't punch the guy, knock him to the ground, and then get on him and strangle the life out of him. That's murder. So what's the difference here? The only difference is the defendant brought a gun. He brought his AR-15. That's why he's got to come up with this cockamamie theory that Joseph Rosenbaum was not only going to take the gun, but take it and then turn it on the defendant. And the defendant actually told you that he thought Joseph Rosenbaum was going to take that gun and not only kill him, but kill other people, which is really ironic considering the defendant is the one who killed people in this case, and the only one. But putting that aside, they have to convince you that Joseph Rosenbaum was going to take that gun and use it on the defendant because they know you can't claim self-defense against an unarmed man like this. You lose the right to self-defense when you're the one who brought the gun.
That's bullshit. You do not lose the right, and you can claim self-defense from an unarmed man. I tell you what, Mr. Weasel DA, go and take a gun from a police officer and see if he shoots your ass. Go ahead. Go grab his gun and try to take it and see how that shit works out.
When you're the one creating the danger, when you're the one provoking other people. The defendant fired 4 shots at Joseph Rosenbaum and caused 5 wounds total. The first shot fractured Joseph Rosenbaum's pelvis.
Oh, shit, 4 shots and 5 wounds? Wow. It's like a magic bullet. Why don't you show a picture of Kennedy getting shot? Maybe that'll impress the jury.
This causes him to be helpless. He is falling face first to the ground, and he is vulnerable. The second shot went through his left hand, probably ricocheted off the ground and hit his lower left thigh. It's a flesh wound. I'm sure it hurt, but probably not all that.
Come back and fight, you coward. It's only a flesh wound. Anyway, see Monty Python? Anyway, when he said flesh wound, I was sorry.
That's serious. The third and fourth shots are as Mr. Rosenbaum has fallen almost completely to the ground. He's parallel to the ground. He is almost face first to the ground. The defendant fires a round into his upper back, which is the kill shot, and another round which grazes his right side.
Kill shot. Kill. He killed him. He wanted to kill him. Notice he's using kill and liar very, how should I say, easily.
Yep. At this point, as you saw in that video, a crowd rushes to that body to try and save Joseph Rosenbaum. They're trying to put clothing on the wound to stop the bleeding. They're going to take him across the street to a hospital. KMH, Frederick South, is literally right across the street. And this crowd, except for the defendant, are all focused on trying to save this person's life. A person, by the way, they probably had never even met before. Because that's what most people do.
Yeah, because if they met his crazy ass, they would have said, good, he deserved to get shot.
Richie McGinnis testified. I rode with Rosenbaum in the back of that SUV. I told him we'd have a beer together when this was all done. Mr. Rosenbaum was unable to respond.
Oh, that's so sad.
The defendant decided to pull the trigger on his AR-15 4 times. That was his decision. And he is responsible for every bullet that comes out of that gun. He doesn't get a pass by pulling the trigger fast. He could have chosen to stop after the first shot, after the second shot, after the third shot, and assessed whether or not there was still a need to keep firing. But he went 4 times in 0.76 seconds. The defense has made a big point of this, how fast he fired, as if that somehow excuses him. Exactly the opposite, ladies and gentlemen. He controls how quickly he pulls the trigger. He is in control of that decision-making process. No one else made him do that. And this is indicative of someone who doesn't care about the consequences, doesn't care to stop and figure out, am I good? Do I need to stop? Or I'm just going to keep on going. And as I said, he tracks the body all the way to the ground with those second, third, and fourth shots. The only way that you could possibly justify the murder of Joseph Rosenbaum is if you believe that
Murder. Kill. Liar.
Joseph Rosenbaum was actually reaching for the defendant's gun. And that a reasonable person in the defendant's position with that AR-15 strapped tightly to his chest would think that Joseph Rosenbaum was even capable of taking that gun away as he's falling to the ground with a fractured right pelvis. And then, not only all that, you'd also have to believe...
Yeah, because he knew that the first round fractured, right? He knew that. So BS.
That Joseph Rosenbaum was going to turn that gun around and use it to kill the defendant. You have to believe all of those things to justify the murder of Joseph Rosenbaum.
Kill.
That's
murder.
why the defense is trying so desperately hard to convince you that Joseph Rosenbaum threatened to kill the defendant, which never happened. That's why they're trying so desperately hard to convince you that Joseph Rosenbaum was reaching for that gun. Because if he's not reaching for that gun, and he's not going to use it to kill the defendant, it is not justified. There is no valid self-defense.
Excuse me.
One of the things the judge has instructed you is that when the defendant provokes this situation, he has to exhaust all reasonable means to avoid killing someone. Did he?
Kill.
He didn't have to shoot. He's the one who chose where to run. He chose to run in between those parked cars. He slows down as he gets there. The crowd's already running away. The defense wants to make a point. There's a whole bunch of people over there who are doing stuff to cars, and the defendant had no escape route. The crowd's actually already running away at this point. They've heard the first gunshot from Joshua Zeminski, and they're already starting to scatter.
Oh, of course. And Kyle knew all this because he had a raving maniac chasing him, and he was in fear of his life. So he knew everything that was going around because he had the FBI drone footage, and he had different angles, and he knew all this, right? You're a freaking idiot.
But if you look on the video, there's a huge open space in that lot where the defendant could have circled back around, and he actually does circle back around after killing Rosenbaum, where he could have gotten away. He has to exhaust all reasonable means of escape before killing Mr. Rosenbaum. Your Honor, I do have some more video I want to play. I'm having a little bit of technical problems that I'd like to work on, so I think this would be a good time to pause if that's okay. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to continue on. I hope your full stomachs won't distract you too much from the presentation here.
Aww.
So I had been talking
He's a
about
funny
the
guy.
murder of Joseph Rosenbaum. And as you can tell, I'm trying to go in chronological order. I'm trying to go through these events in a way that makes the most sense. So count one of the information is with regard to Joseph Rosenbaum. The second count of the information pertains to Richie McGinnis, who you heard.
So normally when he's talking about first count, first that, a lot of closing arguments the DA will just basically say, remember those elements you were talking about? The 3 elements we got to prove? One is that so-and-so was killed, and we know there was a dead body, and he'll go through all how he proved that. And count 2 was blah, blah, blah. And you notice we proved that by blah, 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 blah. And element 3 was this, and here's how we prove that. You really make it clear that, I don't know how he's going to do that, because he didn't make it clear, but we'll see.
Testify. He testified that he was in the line of fire behind Joseph Rosenbaum as the defendant fires 4 rounds with his AR-15, which is loaded with full metal jacket ammunition. Ooh. And I'll talk a little bit more about that type of ammunition in a little bit.
Wow,
but you've heard testimony that it's the type of ammunition that is capable of going through body armor. It is capable of going through a squad car. Wow. It is designed to go through the target and continue flying on for up to...
A 22 can do everything he just said. Maybe the body armor, if it's cheap body armor, it'll go through.
To 550 yards. Richard McGinnis testified that when those shots went off, he thought he had been hit. He thought his life was in danger. One of the rules that I think most people who are familiar with firearms knows is always check your background. Meaning, know what's around your target and know what's behind your target.
Obviously, you haven't watched any of the police shootings that's been going on lately.
Target. This is true when you're hunting, it's true when you're target shooting, and obviously it's true when you've got an AR-15 in downtown Kenosha in the middle of protests with houses and people nearby. But there's no indication the defendant cared one bit about his background, cared one bit about where those bullets were going to go.
Kill, murder, liar, and now he doesn't care.
And as I said, he put Richie McGinnis in danger. Joseph Rosenbaum, and as his own video shows, when he first gets there, he finds Mr. Rosenbaum's body face down on the ground. And I'm going to play this exhibit 15 for you.
Get away! Give me a fuck!
You want to talk about medics? You want to talk about people who care? You want to talk about people who were there trying to help? You just heard them and you just saw them. People who didn't know Joseph Rosenbaum. They just knew somebody needed help. And while that's going on, the defendant flees, callously disregarding the body of the man that he just shot and killed.
Callous.
And as he's running off, he's lying to the crowd about what just happened. This is exhibit number 12.
So there were just like 6 shots. Hit me off.
I wonder when the trial, when they played this, while this guy didn't turn around and help him or run with him or notice he was being pursued, why he ignored him.
The defendant says he pulled a gun.
How many times are you going to play this, dude?
It's not true. Baum didn't have a gun. The defendant knew he didn't have a gun. The defendant is lying to save his own skin.
Liar.
Instead of going and trying to help the person that he has just shot and killed.
Killed.
In exhibit number 3, Gage Grosskreuz's Facebook Live video, He tells
Somebody keeping count of all these liars and killings on how many times he's going to repeat that? AR-15, Full Metal Jacket. Those are all little key phrases. All his little scary phrases to confuse or grab the emotion of the jurors. Should write down how many times he says it.
a similar lie. As they're running, Mr. Grosskreutz asks the defendant, "Did you just shoot someone?" And the defendant says something about the police and then says, "I did not shoot anyone." And this is similar to the lie that he told Jason Lukowski at exactly that same time. As he passes Mr. Lukowski, he says, "I did not shoot anyone." And that was established through Mr. Lukowski's testimony. And again, I think it's worth emphasizing at this point that Jason Lukowski had just met the defendant maybe an hour. This is about 11:50 at night. Mr. Lukowski got there about 10:45.
Almost.
This is Gage Grosskreutz running towards danger, running to try and help.
He wasn't trying to help. He was trying to get the video footage, but whatever.
Number 3.
You shot somebody? Who shot? Who shot? Hey, what are you doing? You shot somebody? Who shot? Who shot? Who shot? Hey, what are you doing? You shot somebody? Who shot?
When you're lying, if you got one piece of good video footage, play it 5 times at one time, even though they've seen it 5 times during the trial. That'll help.
It's hard to tell what his exact words are. I hear the word "not." So at this point,
Now just make up the words. You've been making up everything else. Just make up.
the crowd is dealing with what they perceive to be an active shooter. Someone who has just shot someone, who is still in possession of the gun, who is fleeing the scene. And how are we supposed to know where he's going next? You know, all night that night, the crowd has been hearing the sound of gunshots. They've been hearing fireworks, firecrackers. But now, someone actually has been shot. The crowd sees the defendant running with a gun. He's lying to them. He still has the gun.
Oh, and they know he's lying, right? Because you're saying it like everybody knew he was lying.
He's shot someone. This is provocation to them. This is someone who has committed a criminal act and is putting people in danger. It is entirely reasonable for that crowd to believe at that moment that he is a threat to kill again. The defendant could have made it unequivocal.
Oh, so the crowd was full of good people that were chasing down an active shooter with a gun in order to save lives. Yeah, that's what they were doing. All the yelling about kick him in the head and cranial him and kill him or get him. That was to save the community so they could burn it down more. Really? Who's going to believe this shit?
Unequivocally clear what he was doing. He could have stayed at Mr. Rosenbaum's body, helped protect him, helped preserve his life, call 911. As he's running, he could have announced to the crowd exactly what he was doing, told them. He could have fired warning shots to try and keep him away. He could have dropped the gun.
Oh, yeah, then you'd have been charging him with shooting guns and the bullets could have came down and hit somebody. Sure, he could have fired warning shots.
He could have raised his hands and surrendered. He could have signaled to this crowd that he did not pose a threat anymore.
Yeah, I always surrender to a crowd that's trying to kill me and take my gun. That's a good idea. I think I'll just surrender to them. What an idiot.
But everything he does is indicative of someone who is still a threat. Now, the defendant...
Yeah, because somebody that's a threat always runs to the police with their hands up. Oh, yeah.
He's going to tell you he wasn't. But from the crowd's perspective, how are they supposed to know any different? He does nothing to demonstrate to the crowd that he isn't a threat to kill again. And it turns out he does. It turns out within a few seconds, he does kill again. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that in this situation, the crowd has the right to try and stop an active shooter.
Oh, that's where he's going. He's going to somehow, just now, he didn't say this during the whole damn trial. Now he's going to say the crowd was acting to save lives. They were the heroes. And Kyle was wrong.
They have a right to protect themselves. The defendant is not the only one in the world who has the right to self-defense. But what does the crowd do to try and stop the defendant? I submit to you, and this is not a criticism of them, but they use almost the least minimal, least intrusive means possible.
Oh, so they knew the law better than Kyle, and they were like, well, since I didn't bring a gun, I'll kick him and I'll hit him in the head with a skateboard. You know, better than using one of those mean AR-15s. Really?
They could have used deadly force against him. They could have shot at him. But instead, somebody comes up behind him and knocks his hat off. Anthony Huber comes up with a skateboard and the defendant blocks it with his arm. And then the defendant falls to the ground on his own. No one knocked him down.
Knocks his hat off. Really?
This man that the defense wants to call jump kick man. He's got no weapons, no gun, no knife, no nothing. Comes in and tries to kick the defendant in the face. Anthony Huber comes back and tries to grab the gun. Actually does grab the defendant's gun and tries to pull it away because he's trying to disarm an active shooter. And Gage Grosskreutz comes running in, stops with his hands up in the air until he sees and hears the defendant adjusting his weapon as if preparing to fire again. And then what does Gage Grosskreutz do? He reaches for the gun to try and disarm the defendant. Gage Grosskreutz had his own gun in his own hand. He could have aimed it and fired at the defendant, but he did not. And you heard Gage Grosskreutz testify about that, about how that is a decision that he was not prepared to make at that point in time. He is not the type of person who is just willing to take someone's life in an instant, unlike the defendant, who took 2 lives that night, very quickly and seemingly very easily. There is a video, Exhibit 5, which is the BG on the scene video, which traces this entire incident. They're trying to stop an active shooter using... Someone knocks his hat off. Anthony Huber comes in with a skateboard. In just a few seconds, the defendant kills one person, attempts to kill 2 more, and blows off Gage Grosskreitz's arm. It's that fast. This is someone who has no remorse, no regard for life, only cares about himself. And these folks that are coming at him, the jump kick man, Anthony Huber, aren't armed. They're not a credible, imminent threat to his life. They are trying to stop an active shooter. And they have a right to do so.
Notice the judge just knows it's all bullshit and just ignoring it.
Imagine if the crowd couldn't do that. Imagine if they weren't allowed to try and stop someone in this type of situation. After killing Anthony Huber, after severely wounding Gage Grosskreutz, the defendant walks away like the hero, like he's some sort of hero in a Western, without a care in the world for anything he's just done. You know, it's interesting. This occurs about a block away from the police line, right down the road. If the defendant's so concerned about his safety, the police are right there. And in fact, they pull up to this scene almost instantly. The defendant's got his medic bag on. He proclaims himself a medic. He doesn't know at this point if Anthony Huber's dead or alive or capable of being saved. And yet the defendant offers no assistance, makes no attempt to try and help anyone else. All he cares about is himself.
Yeah, because when I'm getting kicked in the head and hit with a skateboard and having my gun grabbed, that's what I want to do. I want to stop and give medical aid in the middle of that shit. Really?
We have taken that video and we have broken it down into individual frames. And I want to take you through, frame by frame, the incident with Gage Grosskreutz. Because a lot has been made about Mr. Grosskreitz's motions and what he does and where he goes and things like that. So I think it's helpful for us to take a look at this. So this is Exhibit 80, beginning with frame 356.
If you're doing it, it's not because you want to be helpful. It's because you're trying to confuse or push your lies.
At this point, you can see that Anthony Huber is staggering off after being shot in the chest. The wound has entered his lower left rib cage and has wound up almost exiting near his right shoulder. It has ripped through his ribs, his heart, his aorta, and he may not technically be dead, but he's going to be dead within a few seconds. He is stumbling away. The defendant has the weapon pointed towards Gage Grosskreutz here, who is cowering, hovering, hiding, covering his head, trying to stay out of the way. And I'm going to go frame by frame here slowly as we see the movement. Now we see the gun is moving down towards Gage Grosskreutz. It is pointed directly at him from a distance of just a couple of feet. Gage Grosskreutz has his right leg planted as if he's pushing backwards, trying to get away. The gun is still pointed at him. The defendant here is going to adjust the gun, turn it over as if he's making some sort of adjustment on it. Gage Grosskreutz testified that this was a movement that he interpreted as the defendant preparing that gun as if it was going to fire again, as if clearing a jammed round so that he could shoot it at Mr. Grosskreutz. At this point, Mr. Grosskreutz is, I think, probably thinking to himself, if I can get away, I will, until he realizes that the defendant is getting ready to fire again.
Problem is, the gun was never jammed, and he could have fired again, and he didn't, till he got the gun pointed at him. But when you're making up a story and picking your heroes, Binger just wants to pick all the rioters, the criminals, the felons. Kyle's doesn't have no record.
In none of these frames is Mr. Grosskreitz's right hand with his Glock pistol pointed at the defendant.
Does when he reaches. My mouse
You can see
is
Mr.
bigger than
Grosskreutz
yours.
is actually backing up with his
Little
right leg.
pansy.
Let me go back a couple of frames here. This is frame 444. You can see his right foot is on the ground, but it's starting to move back. Now as I move forward in the frames, 447, his right leg is moved back. This is someone who's about to retreat.
So why didn't he?
His hands are in the air. He's backing away from the defendant until, as he's testified, he sees the defendant start to manipulate that gun in such a way that it makes Mr. Grosskreutz feel like he's about to be shot. And only then does he take action. What action does Mr. Grosskreutz take? Does he hold that gun with both hands, the Glock that he's got, and point it at the defendant? No, never. Does he even take the gun with one hand and point it? No, never. Instead, you can see him start to lunge in with his left arm forward. The gun is not in his hand. The gun is in his right hand.
Lawyers always joke in the back rooms when they're doing their closing on what's a good maneuver can I do in front of the audience to get them involved. I mean, this is how they talk. You know, I've had DAs go, dude, man, how can I get the if I want to draw a gun, how can I demonstrate it? Demonstrate it like you would do it. And I would demonstrate drawing a gun or whatever you wanted me to do. And he'd be like, yeah, I'm going to do just like that in front of the jury. That's what I'll do. And he'll practice it. And then he'll go and do it. That's how much thought goes into these little games with people's lives.
He's lunging forward, reaching for the defendant. Probably reaching for the gun. Probably trying to block the gun. You can see now he's going to take a step with his right leg across the defendant's body. Not directly towards the defendant, but across the defendant's body. As he's reaching in, almost swiping away at that gun with his left arm. He has bladed his body in such a way as to try and present as minimal of a target as possible, which is probably what saves his life. His right leg is about to hit the ground here. The gun, the AR-15, is pointed directly at him from just 2, maybe 3 feet away. He's trying to shield himself with his left arm. And as we approach frame 500 here, the gun goes off. At no point in this process is Mr. Grosskreutz pointing his gun at the defendant. Frame 499, the gun is just fired. Frame 500, you see the puff of smoke. 501, the bullet has hit Mr. Grosskreitz's right bicep, severing it. I'm going to continue forward after this because you can see that his right arm, this is an interesting frame right here, 504. You can see that gun. I'll go back even more. You can see that Mr. Grosskreitz's arm with the right hand, with the gun, his right hand is pointed off to the side. What pulls that gun down closer to the defendant is the fact that Mr. Grosskreutz just had his right bicep severed. It's not a voluntary action.
Oh, so Kyle made him point the gun at him by shooting him in his arm. Kyle fired 8 rounds and got 8 hits. He's at 100% hit ratio. You can't find a cop that's ever got 100% hit ratio in a shooting. I mean, it's just unheard of if there's multiple shots fired. A cop's hit ratio is in the 13% area. Most cops miss 87% of the times. Kyle shot 8 times and hit 8 times. If he wanted this guy dead, I think he'd be dead.
It's an involuntary, the muscle is severed. Now watch, frame 502, watch his right hand. 503, 504, 505, 506, 507, 508. At this point, yeah, absolutely. That right arm is probably dangling down towards the defendant. It's not going to be able to pull that trigger without a working bicep muscle, and it's not a voluntary thing.
Oh, so of course Kyle knew that too. Not only is he an expert marksman that wants to run around and shoot people, he's a medical doctor that he says he doesn't have any schooling in, and he knows what every shot does to incapacitate everybody. He knew the hip shot was going to kill the guy, and now he knew the bicep was going to stop him from shooting him. Man, Kyle's just freaking Superman.
It's done because the defendant just blew his arm off. But yeah, this is the time after the shooting when, yes, the gun happens to be pointed at the defendant. And I got to stop here for a moment and highlight the hypocrisy of the defense. Because according to the defense, if someone has a gun, they're a threat. If someone points a gun, they're a threat.
See, when you don't have facts, this is what liberals do all the time. When you don't have facts, you attack people. You call names.
There's only one exception to that. The defendant. By their logic, he gets to run around with a gun all night. But, oh, we're not supposed to take him as a threat. He gets to point the gun at everyone. But, oh, we're not supposed to take him as a threat. No, it doesn't work that way. The same set of rules apply to the defendant as everybody else. There's no exception in the law for Kyle Rittenhouse. There's no exception that says, if anyone else has a gun, you're a danger, except for Kyle Rittenhouse. There's no exception in the law that says, if you point your gun at people, oh, that makes you a threat and I can kill you, except for Kyle Rittenhouse. I can do it all night long.
I mean, he's making some pretty good bullshit arguments, but for an uneducated jury, they may buy it.
The same rules apply to him as everyone else. And everyone else has a right to defend themselves also, not just the defendant.
So he just said the same rules apply to him as cops.
Exhibit 60 is a video taken right after Mr. Grosskreutz was wounded by the defendant. But this is what we're dealing with. When you fire an AR-15 at someone from close range, this is what it looks like. I guarantee you, ladies and gentlemen, the defendant had no clue.
What do? They show did they show the gunshot?
It's hard to look at.
Oh, to get the jury emotional, he probably showed the bicep looking all bloody. Yeah, look what that mean AR did. Wow. It's funny, they never show the wounds when cops shoot people. When was the last time you saw a wound plastered everywhere where a cop shot somebody and killed him? Funny how that works, huh?
But this is what we're dealing with. When you fire an AR-15 at someone from close range, this is what it looks like. I guarantee you, ladies and gentlemen, the defendant had no clue what his gun was capable of. He didn't even bother to pay any attention to it, didn't concern himself with what he would be doing to other people. But this is what happened. Let's not flinch away from this. It's important that we understand what that gun was capable of that night.
See, he's leaving that picture up the whole time. What a... That's why sometimes judges will get a hold of that and say, you're not just going to use this to shock and awe the jury.
It killed 2 people, and it did this to Mr. Grosskreuz's arm. When those shootings occurred that I just played for you, what would a reasonable person in the defendant's position at that time think? The good news is, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to tell us. As part of your decision in this case, you will represent the reasonable person, of ordinary and prudent person, and you will put yourself in the defendant's shoes that night. I submit to you that at the time of those shootings, a reasonable person in the defendant's shoes would have known that he had provoked Joseph Rosenbaum by pointing his gun at someone else, that the defendant had...
A reasonable person that believes you proves that they're not reasonable.
...put someone else at risk of dying by doing that. The defendant should have known that the crowd was aware of the fact that he had just shot someone and that they felt their lives were in danger. That is reasonable. It is also reasonable to understand that at that point, Gage Grosskreutz had just witnessed all of this. He'd heard the defendant had shot someone. He'd heard the defendant lie about it. He saw the defendant shoot at Jump Kick Man at close range, miraculously missing. Had seen the defendant kill Anthony Huber. Gage Grosskreutz reasonably believed his life was in danger at that moment. And he was proven correct, because the defendant shot him too. So when you consider what's reasonable in this case, consider whether or not it's reasonable.
How many people did he shoot that were like standing around rioting and tearing up all night? How many people did he shoot that weren't charging or hitting or assaulting him? The answer is 0.
For a criminal to be able to shoot himself out of a crime scene. When a bank robber robs a bank and runs away and the crowd comes after him, can he just shoot anybody and claim self-defense? If someone comes up to that person and...
except Kyle wasn't creating a bank robbery. He wasn't out there committing crimes. The people that were attacking him were the criminals.
Tries to stop them, tries to disarm them, like Anthony Huber did. Did they forfeit their life? Did Anthony Huber forfeit his life?
Man, I hope the jury ain't buying this.
And protect others. Is that justified? Can the defendant just kill him? In this case, the crowd was right. The crowd knew the defendant had just shot someone.
The crowd was right that if you just destroy and threaten everybody that tries to stop you, you can run the whole freaking neighborhood and do more destruction. But you can't let good citizens protect their property. Otherwise, you'll have crooked DAs like yourself defending them.
When they're coming after him, they know he's just shot and killed Joseph Rosenbaum. But you know, not every active shooter situation is the crowd have perfect knowledge. When they're told that person running up the street just shot someone, we don't have time in the moment to go back and take a look at the body and replay the video and make a decision before going after the person with the gun.
Oh, you don't have time to do that, but Kyle had time to know where all his bullets and all the medical problems that it was having. Kyle knew all that, knew the escape route, knew that the crowd... Kyle knew all that, but nobody else has the time to do that. What a hypocrite.
You know, we've had several police officers testify that in an active shooter situation, their first instinct, their first training is to go in and stop the threat. They don't sit there and wonder, well, maybe it was self-defense. I don't know. I'm going to, wait and see. And every day we read about heroes that stop active shooters. That's what was going on here. And that crowd was right. And that crowd was full of heroes. And that crowd did something that, honestly, I'm not sure I would have had the courage to do. If I see a guy running...
Well, don't worry about not sure. I'm pretty damn sure you're a fucking pussy and you wouldn't have done shit. I'm pretty sure about that. So don't worry about it.
off the street with an AR-15 and I hear he just shot somebody, my first instinct is not to approach. Anthony Huber was different. Jump Kick Man was different. Gage Grosskreutz was different.
They're all heroes.
That doesn't make them a threat to the defendant's life. It doesn't make their lives worthless. They don't give up their right to defend themselves. They have just as much right as the defendant. I told you I wanted to begin by talking about the murders committed
He's just beginning. He's been rattling on for an hour. He's just beginning.
by the defendant. Now I want to go back and put it all in context for you. And that context starts with, bruh, I'm just trying to be famous. The defendant's TikTok profile. 4 doors, more whores. Picture of him up in Ladysmith, probably in early May,
He's a 17-year-old kid. Really?
proudly holding his new AR-15. Up until August 25th, 2020, this is the only time he'd ever fired that gun. Maybe put 100 rounds through it or so at that property up there with Dominic Black. They purchased that gun on that same trip. The defendant admitted he knew as a matter of law he could not buy that gun because he was only 17. Yet he wants to tell you that he thought legally he could possess it, which didn't make a lot of sense to me.
I might object to that straw purchase because unless he's charged for a straw purchase, then it wasn't a straw purchase. You're just accusing him of shit. Why don't you accuse him of murder? Maybe he killed somebody. You can just throw that in there. He probably murdered people on the side of a mountain one time when he was walking. He probably murdered the people that painted on the wall because he had to clean it up. If you're going to just make up shit, then just make it up.
We don't have a lot of defendants come in and say, well, I possess cocaine. I knew I couldn't buy it, but I thought I could possess it. No, it's not the way it works. Dominic Black conducted what we call a straw purchase for the defendant. He purchased that gun for someone who was not legally allowed to purchase it for
Dominic
himself.
Black ain't on
I'm
trial.
prosecuting Dominic Black for that, as you know, just like I'm prosecuting Joshua Zeminski. Because what Dominic Black did was wrong, and we don't tolerate that. The agreement was Dominic
I didn't know he was prosecuting for that straw purchase. Oh, is that the guy they delayed the trial till they got his testimony? Yeah, that's right.
Black was going to keep that gun until the defendant turned 18. It was Dominic Black's gun. It was legally his.
He ain't getting a conviction on that one either. If he prosecutes that as a straw purchase, no jury should convict him.
And the defendant knew that it was going to be held onto until he turned 18, that he was not going to have it until that birthday.
I think one of the elements for a straw purchase is you have to supply a gun and give it or gift it or sell it to someone that you purchased it for, and he never did. He maintained care, custody, and control over it.
I want to focus a little bit on this AR-15 because I think it's important when you consider the recklessness of the defendant's conduct, how much he knew, cared, or didn't know about this deadly weapon. He'd only fired it that one time, maybe 100 rounds through it. He loaded the gun with full metal jacket ammunition, which I'll talk about a little bit more. He wanted it because he said it looked cool. Didn't seem to know or care much about the type of ammunition or the type of gun. You had a couple of witnesses tell us in this trial, and it just
Well, wait a minute. Either he didn't care about the ammunition or he picked full metal jacketed to do more damage. Which one is it, you freaking lying piece of shit?
I could not believe it. A gun is a gun is a gun. Don't even start with that. And a bullet is a bullet. No, it is not. It is not. And anybody who says that is ignorant and reckless. Because there are some important distinctions here. Full metal jacket ammunition is capable of piercing body armor and squad cars. And you heard Officer Krieger testify that when they heard someone was running around with a rifle, he went and got his plate armor out of the back because their regular body armor wasn't going to stop those rounds. Ryan Balch talked about how full metal jacket ammunition is designed, and this is a former Army infantryman, is designed to go through a target, like a deer or a person, and continue on. He says it can hit a target 550 yards away. That's 5.5 football fields.
So?
And he explained that he had a handgun that night, which he put...
I could probably shoot your little freaking cockatiel hairdo off at 550 and not even hit you. What's your point?
Ammunition on. And that's what he was planning on using for self-defense. Because hollow point ammunition acts differently. It's going to hit its target, but it's not designed to continue on and go through and hit other targets. So you will hit what you hit, but you're not going to put the rest of the community at risk, especially on a night when there are hundreds of people out on the streets in a heavy residential area. We can see on that map, the car source, there are houses, there are churches, there are daycares, there are schools nearby, and you're firing full metal jacket ammunition around.
I'm pretty sure the daycare and the schools were empty, but maybe he doesn't know that. I'm sure that was just an honest mistake. He thought they were all occupied.
I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that AR-15 had no lawful or legitimate purpose that night. Now, the Second Amendment
So self-defense isn't a lawful purpose, right?
allows people to carry guns. That is true. There are people who can't carry guns. Convicted felons, for example. But,
Yeah, like the guy you're defending saying it's such a great guy that had his gun illegally.
generally speaking, I'm not saying people don't have the right to carry a gun. What I'm saying is that AR-15 did not accomplish any of the goals that these folks said it was going to.
It sure as hell did. It stopped 4 people from killing his ass. It accomplished them perfectly.
So, for example, Ryan Balch says the handgun is what he was going to use for self-defense. Several witnesses agreed you can't point this gun or shoot this gun at people to protect property. So if you're going to protect the CarSource building, how is this gun going to help with that?
Oh, we got to pull the gun out again. Oh.
The defendant has admitted the gun was useless when he was going to treat people as a medic because it got in the way. He had to take it off and hand it to someone. So you can't use it as a medic. You can't use it to protect the building. So what's it there for? Well, it looks pretty imposing and it has some deterrence value, but Jason Lukowski, Dominic Black, and Ryan Balch all said they never actually intended to use their guns. So why is it there?
I think Kyle said the same thing, that he didn't intend. Oh, he must have forgot that. I'm sure it was an honest mistake.
The defendant was wearing a sling that night. He purchased that sling at Jelinski's that afternoon. The purpose of the sling was so the gun couldn't be taken away. Wouldn't fall off. He wouldn't lose possession of it.
Actually, that's part of the purpose, but anybody can rip it off you or drag you around with it. And actually, if somebody grabs your gun and starts swinging it, having a sling is a bad thing if you can't disconnect it or get it off you. But I'm sure the DA just forgot that.
It was designed to help him retain possession of that gun. And he loaded it with 30 rounds, the full magazine, capable of killing 30 people or more.
Who thinks if he'd have put 28 rounds, the DA wouldn't be making a big deal about it? Raise your hand.
Why do you need 30 rounds of full metal jacket armor to protect a building? This AR-15 is completely incompatible with the role of a medic. Richie McGinnis testified he's been to demonstrations in Seattle, Portland, Washington, D.C., New York, Minneapolis. He's never seen anyone walking around claiming to be a medic with an AR-15.
Yet he was claiming to be a medic with a pistol. So that was okay. An unlawful pistol that he unlawfully possessed. But now I'm sure he just forgot that.
And certainly when you see someone like that, it doesn't exactly send a warm, fuzzy message. Oh, come to me. I'm here to help. And the defendant acknowledged he had to take off his AR-15 to treat people. No serious, credible medic wears an AR-15 slung around their body. That's because the defendant was a fraud. He was not.
Oh, he's a fraud.
EMT.
He's a liar.
He lied.
He's a killer. He's a fraud. How many other names can we call him? Hang on. He'd probably call him gay if he didn't think it was get censored.
He lied to the press. He's being interviewed by Richie McGinnis, who he hears is a member of the media, and he says, I'm a certified EMT. You lied.
Lied. Liar.
Lying. You're absolutely lying. Jason Lukowski and Dominic Black said the defendant had to borrow his medical supplies from us. This is an emergency situation. Everybody's anticipating violence. Everybody's prepared for people to be hurt, harmed, injured, and yet the defendant's going to go there and walk around claiming to be a medic?
So let me get this straight, Mr. Liar, liar pants on fire. You're saying now that everybody's prepared for violence and damage and injury, and they all brought their medical stuff, but Kyle didn't. Therefore, he wasn't prepared for injury. Earlier, you said he was the only one expecting violence, and that's why he carried a gun. You're such a freaking liar, dude.
He's like a quack doctor, practicing without a license. That puts lives at risk.
Oh, so now he's a quack. A liar, a quack. Doesn't care. Wow.
And one of the things I had Gage Grosskreutz testify about is that tattoo on his right arm, which said, "First, do no harm."
It's not there anymore. But anyway, I digress.
Which is one of the precepts, one of the fundamental tenets of the practice of medicine. First, do no harm.
So if Kyle had the same tattoo, he'd be okay? Is that how you judge your medical staff on what tattoos they have? Freaking idiot.
So how do we evaluate the defendant's performance as a medic that night? Well, on one hand, he wrapped up an ankle and I think maybe helped somebody who got a cut on their hand. Yay. On the other hand, he killed 2 people, blew off Gage Grosskreitz's arm, and put 2 more lives in jeopardy. So, when we balance your role as a medic that night, I don't give you any credit. He showed no remorse for his victims, never tried to help anybody that he hurts, and even on the witness stand, when he testified on Wednesday, he broke down crying about himself, not about anybody that he hurt that night.
Oh, so now he's a liar. Oh my God. I can't even keep up with everything. Liar, a fraud, fake medic, and now he's crying about himself and not anyone else. What a horrible human being. 17-year-old kid should just be better. Wow.
No remorse, no concern for anyone else.
That's very hard to hear all that when you're a young kid. Having a grown adult who's prosecuting you, trying to take away your life, and you got to sit there and listen to this. You can't defend yourself. You can't say anything. You can't show any emotion. That's a very difficult position, people.
For him to call himself a medic is an insult to anyone like Gage Grosskreutz, who's spent hundreds of hours training and working hard to become an EMT. It's an insult. The defendant made a series of reckless decisions
Damn, I think he's dating Gage because he just loves that guy.
that night, going armed with an AR-15 at 17 years old when he knew he shouldn't have done so, because that gun is normally locked in a safe that he doesn't have access to, and it's not even legally his. He's out after a city.
So wait a minute, it's not legally his, but you're charging the other guy for buying it a straw purchase for him. So it's not his, but you're charging another person. Yeah, another little inconsistency you miss.
Citywide curfew. He's intentionally and knowingly entering into a dangerous situation, and he expects it because he brings along his AR-15 and some body armor. So don't tell me you didn't know. He brings along no non-lethal means of defense, which means his only option is to kill. I don't know about a lot of you, but I remember that night. I didn't come down here. I don't think most reasonable people did. In part because...
Oh, so anybody down there wasn't reasonable. He just said, well, I didn't go down there like most reasonable people. Everybody down there was unreasonable according to him right now. But yet they're all heroes and Kyle's the bad guy.
we all knew it was going to be violent and dangerous.
You just said Kyle was the only one that wanted violence to happen. Otherwise, it was just... This dude is so inconsistent. Please tell me the juries are catching this.
Reasonable people, to the extent they came out, they were gone by then. Because you don't willingly put yourself in this situation. Unless you want it. Unless you're looking for it.
You mean like the 3 people that hit him in the head with the skateboard and tried to grab his gun? Like those people that wanted it?
Unless you want trouble. Now, to put this in perspective, at this time here in our community, there were people who were scared. There were people who were worried about themselves, their homes, their families, their business. That's understandable. But this is different. There are also people out there who are exercising their First Amendment right to assemble and to have free speech because of whatever they believed in. And they have that right too. But that's not what we're talking about. The curfew, the riots, the arson, the looting that we'd seen on those prior nights, roadblocks set up around downtown, closed exits on the interstates, all of this was sending the message to reasonable people, go away. Don't come down here. Who was left at 11:45 at night?
So if nobody was reasonable, how can you say all the people that attacked Kyle were the greatest heroes in the world?
Most reasonable people had gone home before the curfew, or never even came at all. But the defendant's down there, he says, because he wants you to believe he's protecting CarSource, even though he had no actual ties or genuine concern for this building. You have this caravan of people from West Bend, Ryan Balch, Jason Lukowski, Joanne Fiedler, coming down from some other community, having no idea what's going on here in Kenosha, having no idea what businesses are, having never dealt with CarSource before, just injecting themselves into this situation. CarSource that night was empty. The owners testified. They moved all the cars off the lot. They took the tools out from inside.
Oh, yeah, they were the most credible witnesses ever. I believe everything they said. Shit, they're as credible as you freaking idiot.
And they didn't even feel the need to protect that building. So who's there? These guys with their AR-15s are just wannabe soldiers, acting tough, trying to manufacture some personal connection to this event, furthering their own personal agenda.
I got chicken wings with more meat on them than this guy's arm. Never mind, I digress.
Small part of the deluge of chaos tourists we saw here in Kenosha, trying to feed off of what we were going through, despite everything we did to try and tell them, go away, stay out. Did those owners, Sam and Sal, ask anyone to protect their business? You know, I called them to the stand because I wanted you to hear from them. I had their statement, but I wanted you to hear from them. And I'm sure you formed your own impressions about them.
You're an idiot.
I'm not here to tell you that I believe what they said on the witness stand.
Oh, wait a minute. He's calling his own witness a liar now.
I don't think it really matters much, except I wanted you to have a flavor of who these people were and what was going on at that building. What was interesting to me is that text message from the defendant to Sam asking for the address.
So you don't even believe them or want the jury to believe them, yet you put them on a stand. I think that's called suborning perjury, if I'm not mistaken.
Of CarSource, even though the defendant says he's already been there. It didn't make any sense to me. It's not hard to find if you've driven past there every day. You know, Kenosha is one of the easiest cities in Wisconsin to navigate. It's all east, west, north, south. How hard is it to find this place? But the agreement was the defendant was supposed to stay at the 59th Street location. There's another group at 63rd. It was their responsibility, and the defendant testified that when the shootings occurred at 11:45 or 11:50 at night, he didn't even know if that other group was still there or if they'd left. But crucially, you heard the testimony of Kriston Harris, who was out there reporting for his Rundown Live, and he's making some video. And he tells the defendant, stay on your property. Don't go out in the streets and engage with these protesters because you're just making it worse and you're escalating the situation. He tells the defendant specifically that, just 20 minutes before the shootings. Christian Harris probably said that because he knows this is a crowd that is feeling threatened by the defendant and his group. Richie McGinnis testified when he left the Stella Hotel and immediately ran over to 59th Street, he saw guys up on the roof and he felt threatened. These guns, he said, were the thing that changed the dynamic for him.
I can't believe these guys, the defense attorney, isn't making notes. Because anytime he makes a point, they should be ready to counter that and be able to say, the prosecutor told you this. Do you remember this? And point out every time he freaking lied or misled them.
Drew Hernandez, we showed video of Drew Hernandez having laser sights pointed at him. And he said he felt threatened. He thought someone was pointing a gun from the roof and putting his life in jeopardy. These are two people who are veterans. They've been to protests in Seattle, Portland, Washington, D.C., New York. They've been through this before. And yet here in little old Kenosha, the defendant's group made them fear for their lives. That's the kind of impact these AR-15s had. The crowd is yelling at the defendant's group, stop pointing your guns at us, stop pointing these laser pointers at us. And the defendant sees this. He's well aware of the fact that the crowd out on the street is hostile. They don't react well to him. And he knows that by 11:35 at night, this crowd is all the way down there south of 60th. That's where they're at.
He was a kid and not using good judgment. I will say he's guilty of that. But if we locked up every kid that didn't use good judgment, our jails would be full and we wouldn't have a lot of kids running around.
So if I go down there, I need to be prepared and I need to expect that these folks are not on my side. Joseph Rosenbaum. He's dead. So we don't know what he was thinking.
Which is probably better for all of society.
We don't know what was going on in his mind. That makes him an easy target for the defense today because they can stand up here and pile on him and destroy his reputation, and he can't speak for himself.
Destroy his reputation. What? Of beating, holding a knife, assault, raping kids? That's the reputation he'd be defending? You admire him because you're just as low down and dirty.
That happens a lot in homicide trials.
I actually think Rosenbaum probably has more ethics and integrity than this DA. That's sad.
Blame the victim, who can't speak for themselves. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Joseph Rosenbaum, and you've heard some testimony about him. He had been in the hospital, left it that day, had a clear plastic bag with his possessions, toiletries, a water bottle. We've all seen this. You get it in the hospital. It's pretty common. He's walking around like it's pretty much his only possession in the world. He visits Carrie Ann Swart, his girlfriend, and then happens to wander downtown into the middle of civil unrest. No indication he planned to be there. No indication he's part of any sort of movement. He just happens to stumble into it. So what does he do that
Stumble into it.
night? Oh, let me tell you all the awful things Joseph Rosenbaum did. He tipped over a porta potty that had no one in it.
How do you know he didn't know somebody was in it? Maybe he didn't care. Maybe you're okay with somebody destroying and creating environmental and nasty issues where people can get infected in your city. Maybe you're okay with that. Woody, the weasel. He's got a Woody Woodpecker haircut and he's a weasel. I'm going to call him Woody the Weasel now.
He swung a chain. He lit a metal garbage dumpster on fire. Oh, and there's this empty wooden flatbed trailer that they pulled out in the middle of the road and they tipped it over to stop some bearcats and they lit it on fire. Oh, and he said some bad words. He said,
Wow, he's such a hero. Man. Look how he can manipulate and make evil good, and then he turns around and makes Kyle, who's out there giving medical and washing off graffiti and helping his community, and he makes him look so evil. What a low, low, low person.
the N-word. If he were alive today, like Joshua Zeminski, I'd probably try and prosecute him for arson, but I can't because the defendant killed him. But that's the way we deal with people that do these things. When you commit arson, we prosecute you. We don't execute you in the street. And I'm not here to say that the things that Joseph Rosenbaum did were good or that I condone that kind of behavior. Not at all. But he didn't deserve to die for it. You can't kill someone for these things.
He didn't kill him for turning over a porta potty, and he didn't kill him for freaking lighting a dumpster on fire. He killed him for chasing him and trying to take his damn gun and saying that I was going to kill you.
He's 5'4", 150 pounds. Jason Lukowski characterized him as a babbling idiot. Lukowski says, I turned my back and walked away. This guy wasn't even a threat. I think we all know somebody like Joseph Rosenbaum, the Napoleon complex, the little guy who just wants to chatter. But
Matter of fact, you look kind of short with that haircut trying to make you look tall. I think you kind of fit the Napoleon guy, dude.
when it comes down to it, it's all bark. It's no bite. It's like a little dog. Bark, 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 bark. But really, ain't going to do anything. There is no dispute in this record that at no point that night did Joseph Rosenbaum hurt anyone. Never had a gun, never had a knife, never had a bat.
We don't know that. He had a chain. You gonna bring that up? Oh, maybe he had a skateboard just for getting around, right?
Never at a club. And in the Drew Hernandez video, that fight at Ultimate Gas that we showed you, he's being shoved around by the crowd like a rag doll. And yeah, he's mouthing off, he's talking a lot, but he doesn't actually threaten anybody, doesn't actually hurt anybody. They're pushing him around like he's a tiny little person, which, frankly, he was. And in the background of this video, you will hear somebody say, point your gun at me, or something like that. That's Joseph Rosenbaum. He's upset because somebody pointed a gun, and that triggers him, which is understandable. I think most of us would be triggered by that sort of thing. And that's what's upsetting to him. But he gets right in the face of people who have AR-15s. Never reaches for their guns, never rears back to punch anyone, never even lays hands on anybody.
Yeah, he doesn't do that because he's outnumbered. Because he didn't have the scare. You notice the only one he attacked and chased was the youngest, smallest person out there? Because he's a predator, and he's a weasel like you. And he only picks on those that can't fight back. Because they're bullies, like you.
You're going to watch this confrontation here at Ultimate Gas, and I want you to keep in mind that there's a group of people on one side with AR-15s and a group of people on the other side. And none of the people with the AR-15s feel their life is in danger.
None of them gets hit in the head with a skateboard. None of them gets knocked to the ground. None of them has been beat while he's running. None of them's been threatened that they're going to get killed. Right. There was no threat because they had numbers and the other people were talking shit. They weren't isolated alone being chased into a dark corner where they were outnumbered with not knowing anybody and a bunch of people were busting cars up. Big difference in those two scenarios for those jurors that can't figure it out.
None of them shoot their guns. They can handle themselves. The defendant can't. That sound you heard was somebody throwing some sort of plastic thing at one of the stanchions underneath the gas station, and it makes a sound that almost sounds like a gunshot. So add that into the mix. You've got people with guns, loud voices, clear hostility, and the sound of something that, frankly, to me sounds like a gunshot, and yet everybody keeps their cool. Nobody hurts anybody. Nobody fires a gun. And watch how they push Joseph Rosenbaum around like a rag doll. Watch this guy in yellow. He's going to shove Joseph Rosenbaum about 8 feet away.
Who did that? I don't think the guy in the yellow did that. I think he's lying again. Let's see. I think he pushes him a little back. This guy pushes him a while. This is his push. But again, the weasel misstating the evidence, lying, giving misinformation, says he pushed him. He didn't. This guy pushed him.
Well, I guess it was a different guy that did that, but they're shoving him around like a rag doll. Nobody feels threatened by Joseph Rosenbaum. He's not reaching for anybody's gun. He's a mouthy little guy. He's a little dog that barks.
Much like you.
And you know what he's going to do now? He's going to tell him, hey, I need to go grab my bag. I don't have my bag. So they let him on through. There he is about to reach down and grab his bag off the ground. That's Joseph Rosenbaum.
Yeah, because that's where he's got his crank at, and he doesn't want somebody else to take it because he paid good money for it.
You've heard testimony that he tells people, shoot me, asking them to shoot him. I'm curious how that's a threat to anyone else.
It shows that he's freaking crazy. It shows that he ain't scared of guns. It shows that his ignorance transpired later when he tried to grab a gun.
He's triggered, as we saw in that video, by people pointing guns at other people, which is reasonable. Most people would feel that same way. And then we get to the crux of the defense, this threat that he supposedly made to the defendant. The defense would love to be able to play you a video of this threat. They would love for you to see it and hear it yourself.
Even without the threat, I still think it's self-defense.
This is a night in which there are dozens of people out there reporters and regular folks who are recording with their cell phones and with other cameras all night long. We have shown you video of almost every minute of the defendant's night from multiple different angles. And yet, you have not been shown a single video with this threat. Nowhere. It's not out there. Ryan Balch testified, and we have his transcript. There was an incident in which Dustin Collette had put out a dumpster fire and said something to the effect of, "Fuck around and find out." And Balch steps in, and he has an exchange with the protesters, and he turns around, and Rosenbaum is right there in front of my face yelling and screaming. And I tell him to back up. And he goes, "You know what? If I catch any of you guys, blah, blah, blah." So that's the timing, according to Ryan Balch, right after that dumpster fire.
So it isn't Kyle that's just saying he said it. Someone else heard him say it. So he has to discredit 2 witnesses that heard him.
Chris Don Harris from the Rundown Live was there.
Do you think he cares if it was really said? Or he just doesn't want the jury to think it said so he can win? That's what I'm talking about when I say he's unethical. This isn't about the truth. This is about his ego and winning and using his power to put a 17-year-old kid's whole life in jail and in prison so he can feel like he got to win.
Physically, standing right next to Ryan Balch. Not only was he there during the dumpster fire, but he stays with Ryan Balch and or the defendant for the next 6 or 7 minutes, recording everything. And I've played this video for you. 1 hour and 28 minutes. And I asked Chris Don Harris, I called him to the stand, and I said, I'm going to ask you 2 questions. Number 1, do you independently remember seeing Joseph Rosenbaum hearing this threat? And he said no. And then I said, okay, well, maybe you missed it, because, there's a lot going on. So will you rewatch your video for me and tell me, is it in there? And he said no. This video captures that entire period of time with Ryan Balch and the defendant right there, and there's no threat. There's no Rosenbaum. It didn't happen. And this threat is critical to their case. But it's not there. Joseph Rosenbaum isn't even visible. Now, I submit to you that even if, this is Exhibit 18, even if there was a threat made, it's still not enough.
Even if, in case I didn't convince you or confuse you, and some of you dummies might believe it.
Pinned a lot of their case on a threat that didn't happen, and they can't prove. It's not on video. It's not there. So I'm going to pull up Exhibit 18, the Rundown Live video, and I'm going to go to that mark.
Chris Don here, here's the Rundown Live. If you
Fire.
put it in a blunt, it would be just a fucking cent. I can use a doobie right now.
Joseph Rosenbaum is not in this video. Here's Dustin Collette about to put the fire out.
Hey. Reel in. Don't cause problems when there's none here. Yeah, that's true. Just stay on your property. Just a little bit between you. I have to agree with her.
There's Ryan Balch standing right next to Gage Grosskreutz. Joseph Rosenbaum isn't here. And the defendant and his group are being told an important message. As long as you stay on your property, but don't go out there and cause trouble.
Oh, they're causing trouble for putting out a fire, not the people burning down shit. Perfect.
I have to agree with her. They shouldn't be on the street. It was protecting their property. When the guy's an asshole. I thought they were yelling at them. I was like, when the guy's losing his patience, to go inside. Yeah, if you guys can switch him out.
He's talking to Ryan Balch right now.
He's got a lot of rage. He said the wrong thing. This whole property is guy's lie. Protect your property. They're respecting that. Just keep it there.
This is where Ryan Balch goes and talks to a protester.
He's just trying to protect his property. He doesn't want anything. He has no problem with you guys. He just doesn't want to burn down the shit. I can't blame him. I understand. Hey, your job isn't to be in the street. You guys stay on your property. That's why you got problems already with people. No one's bothering your property. Don't look for trouble or anything. A medic? I know you are, but they got their own medics. And, somebody's supposed to take care of them. I know you're just trying to make peace. I get that, but they don't look at it that way. They look at you guys as it's as much as you guys are afraid of us pretty much down here. I know, but when the conversation's ready. Thanks, guys.
Back away from the business. Back away from the business.
The rest of the video is the crowd being warded off by gas launched by the police. They launch tear gas, which affects the defendant, which affects Ryan Balch, it affects Kriston Harris, and that group all runs alongside the 59th Street car source, away from the street, away from any protesters. At no point in that video do you hear any threat that Joseph Rosenbaum makes. It's not there. Trust me. If the defense had it, they'd play it for you. It was something that the defendant took into account when he decided to kill Joseph Rosenbaum. One of the questions that occurs to me is, how would the defendant even know who that guy is? Because earlier in the night, Joseph Rosenbaum is wearing a red shirt and a blue bandana. But by the time he's killed, he's got no shirt on. He's got no blue bandana. This is someone the defendant has never even met before. He's one of hundreds of people in the crowd.
That also means he's changing his appearance because he's out there committing crimes, you idiot.
And yet, we're expected to believe that in a split second, the defendant remembers this guy? I don't believe so. So then, that
You don't believe anything that hurts your case.
video that I just showed you leaves off at about 11:35 p.m. The police have moved the protesters south of 60th Street. They've tear gassed the crowd, and there's no protesters left. 59th Street is no longer in any danger. Wasn't much danger to begin with. Wasn't anything left there to protect. But by this point, there's no more danger. As law enforcement comes through, you've heard this video where they tell the defendant and his group, "We appreciate you," and hand him out bottles of water. As long as you stay on that private property, yeah. No one is saying you don't have the right to stay on private property and protect private property. What people are saying, what the crowd is saying, is stay there. Don't go out looking for trouble.
I think Kyle shot Rosenbaum on private property, where he was chased on private property. Did you miss that part? Oh, I'm sorry. He must have just forgot it. I'm sure this isn't intentional.
The defendant hears this message from the police and takes it the wrong way. He thinks, oh, well, now I'm junior policeman. I can go run around stopping crime. But I asked him and I asked some other witnesses, if the police are there on the scene and the protesters are gone, go home. Why are you still here? Shouldn't have been here in the first place. But why are you still sticking around? And interestingly enough, one of the questions I've always had in the back of my mind is, what's the end game here? When is this crew going to be done and decide that it's time to leave? Well, right after the defendant kills Joseph Rosenbaum, kills Anthony Huber, and comes back, they all flee like rats off a sinking ship.
Oh, so they're all guilty because they all brought those mean AR-15s.
But it's boring at 59th Street. There's no protesters. There's no action. So the defendant decides about 11:35 p.m. to cross the police line and go looking for trouble. He knows at this point he's entering a hostile crowd. He's seen this crowd. He knows what they're like. That's why he has to yell friendly to them, because he knows they're not going to see him and think he's friendly. And he knows he's got to have Ryan Balch with him, some sort of buddy to protect him. And he's immediately confronted by that man with the yellow pants who says, "You just pointed your gun at me." And the defendant says, "Yeah, I did." He admits that. Now, what's interesting to me is that
He did not admit that he pointed the gun. He said, "I did," sarcastically, denying it as a question or a joke. Again, misstating the evidence, being the unethical liar he is.
they want you to believe this never happened. They want you to believe this guy in the yellow pants made it up or is lying. But he's just standing there by the side of the road, minding his own business, when the defendant happens to walk up to him. Do you think he just sat there and thought, oh, I'm going to make up a lie about this guy on the spur of the moment? Or did it really happen? And is it consistent with everything else you've seen about the defendant?
Well, yeah, because only reasonable people were there, right? You said all the reasonable people stayed home. So he's unreasonable. He's yelling yellow pants, but he would never make nothing up. It's funny. Everybody that can help his case is a freaking hero and is a wonderful, reasonable person.
Does he sound like the sort of guy who would point a gun at someone for standing on a car? Does he strike you as the kind of guy that would threaten deadly force to protect property? Because that's what happened. The man in the yellow pants says it happened. The defendant agrees. And then he comes into the trial and says, oh, I was being sarcastic. Like he's a little 17-year-old and he wants to get out of it.
He is 17-year-old, you freaking idiot.
Shortly after that, the defendant loses track of his protector, Ryan Balch. So now he's in a position where he knows that he's surrounded by people that consider him a threat. He knows that he's not supposed to go anywhere without Ryan Balch. He knows he's supposed to go back to 59th Street. And he does. He tries. He walks up to the police line. He says, I work there. That's my business, which isn't true, but whatever. And they won't let him through. Now, Ryan Balch makes it on through shortly thereafter, but the defendant gives up. He could go one block in either direction and make it back easily if he wants to, but he stops and decides, you know what, I'm going to stay here and maybe see what's going to happen. So then he talks to these people with fire extinguishers, and he's going to go down to 63rd Street, and he asks one of them to come along, and they say no. Now, at this point, he doesn't have Ryan Balch. He knows he's supposed to go back. He knows he's supposed to have a buddy, and yet he decides to go it alone. He decides to run down to 63rd Street or walk down to 63rd Street. Doesn't even know if that other group is still there. Doesn't even know if he's really needed, but he can't wait to take this opportunity to go down and confront people. Because he thinks he's some sort of cop, some sort of law enforcement agent, some sort of junior cadet who's out there with the responsibility to fight crime. Nobody.
Did he confront anybody? I don't think I saw him confront one person ever. Maybe the DA saw some different video that I missed.
Asked him to do that. Nobody gave him the right. Nobody deputized him. Ryan Balch says, the police told me, the crowds, we're going to push them down by you. You're going to deal with them. The Bearcats.
So he's using the term junior cadet intentionally because Kyle testified that he was a cadet for the fire or the police. He was an explorer, whatever he used the term. So he's connecting his testimony with phrases that sound like it to give his phrase more credibility because the jury heard him use a similar phrase on the stand in a totally different context with a totally different meaning. But the DA is using his lawyer techniques to create lies and manipulate the evidence.
Let's hand out water and tell him he's appreciated. As he's crossing the police line, they warn him about people throwing rocks. What is the message the defendant takes from all of this? The wrong message. Oh, well, now I've got the power. I've got the gun. I'm going to go confront these bad guys. I'm going to stick my nose in things. So what does he do when he gets down to 63rd Street? The first thing he does, we showed it to you at the very beginning, that drone video, grabs that gun and points it at someone to protect property. Points it at the Zeminskis. Because why? Because they're, what, about to mess with some sort of fire? They're not threatening anyone's lives. He doesn't need to protect anyone. He doesn't need to protect himself. He's pointing a gun because he thinks he needs to protect property. He says he wants to put out a fire, but the first thing he does is drop the fire extinguisher on the ground. His AR-15 isn't going to put out a fire.
So now he dropped it. Earlier you said he set it down. Now we're back to drop. He can't even keep his own lies straight.
So why is he really there? And we all agree, you can't use or threaten deadly force to protect someone else's property. You are here to decide whether or not his actions are legally justified, not to buy pathetic excuses that might be given to you. As a teacher, when a student says to you, the dog ate my homework, that's an excuse, it doesn't get you out of the homework assignment. If you panic in a situation that is not reasonable, that is an excuse. It is not a legal justification. If you're 17, if you don't have training or experience, if you put yourself in a situation where you're in over your head, if you're scared, those are excuses. Those are not legal justifications to kill. They do not erase your personal responsibility for your own actions. The court has read to you the instructions in this case. They lay out the law that you should apply. That reading took a long time, and I understand there was a lot to digest. And one of the things that you will have the opportunity to do when you go back and deliberate is read through those instructions yourselves. Because I get that listening to them doesn't always make it clear. But I encourage you to focus on some things when you consider the defendant's behavior in this case. You are told that criminally reckless conduct is conduct that threatens other people's lives and poses an unreasonable and substantial risk to other people. There is no dispute the defendant's activities here threatened other people's lives. He took 2 lives. You know, this is not like a normal murder case. A lot of murder cases we're in here trying to convince a jury that the defendant killed somebody. That's not dispute here. That's the easy part. The question is, does he get a pass? Do we think that's okay? Do we think what he did was right? That's the question you have to answer.
Actually, we should be saying, what does the law say, and was he acting lawfully or unlawfully? But
And when you consider whether his conduct was criminally reckless, consider, did it pose an unreasonable and substantial threat to the safety of others?
I actually think your conduct is criminally reckless. You're risking a person going to jail for the rest of his life with your lies and deceit. That's criminally reckless in my book. Woody?
Count 4 charges him with first-degree intentional homicide of Anthony Huber. There is no doubt that the defendant intended to kill Anthony Huber or committed conduct that he knew was practically certain to kill Anthony Huber. That gun was pointed at Anthony Huber's lower left ribcage, and the defendant deliberately pulled the trigger. That was no accident. And when you do that with an AR-15 against someone's body, it is practically certain to kill. We all know this case comes down to self-defense, but there's a high bar for using deadly force in a self-defense situation. The law says that the defendant may intentionally use force, which is intended or likely to cause death or great bodily harm, only if the defendant reasonably believed that the force was necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to himself. So did Joseph Rosenbaum?
It doesn't say that. It says himself or others, but he left that part out.
Pose an imminent threat of death or great bodily harm to the defendant? No way. Did Anthony Huber pose an imminent threat of death or great bodily harm to the defendant? Absolutely.
I think a kick to the head is significant. Let me kick you in the head. If it can't cause you serious bodily injury, I'll give you $50. Let me kick you in the head. It can't cause you serious injury, right? Let's try it. Prove me wrong.
Not. Did Jump Kick Man or Gage Grosskreutz? No. None of these people posed an imminent threat to the defendant's life or to cause great bodily harm. The standard, when you make this decision, is what a person of ordinary intelligence and prudence would have believed in the defendant's position under the circumstances that existed at the time of the alleged offense. The reasonableness of the defendant's beliefs must be determined from the standpoint of the defendant, at the time of the defendant's acts and not from the viewpoint of the jury now. So put yourself in the defendant's position. Would you have done the same thing? Would a reasonable person have done the same thing? Would you have engaged in the reckless conduct that led to this course of events? Would you have gone out after curfew with an AR-15 looking for trouble? Would you have aimed at other people? Would you have tried to use the gun to protect an empty car lot? No reasonable person would have done these things. The court has also instructed you on provocation. You cannot hide behind self-defense if you provoked the incident. If you created the danger, you forfeit the right to self-defense. By bringing that gun, aiming it at people, threatening people's lives, the defendant provoked everything. And if he does that, he has to exhaust all reasonable means to avoid a confrontation. All reasonable means. So if Joseph Rosenbaum's running at him, Joseph Rosenbaum is no threat to his life. And not only is the defendant expected to run, he's expected to yell, push, shove that rag doll around, run back for help, call 911, call for help, do all sorts of other things besides just turn and fire 4 shots as Joseph Rosenbaum falls helpless to the ground. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no doubt in this case that the defendant committed.
Notice he didn't go through the elements and say, I proved these elements to you. That's a big freaking clue that he knows he didn't prove them. Because every attorney always shows the jury how they prove the elements.
These crimes. He committed a first-degree reckless homicide against Joseph Rosenbaum. He put Richie McGinnis's life in jeopardy. He put Jump Kick Man's life in jeopardy. He intended to kill Anthony Huber. And he attempted to kill Gage Grosskreutz. All of those elements are true. The question is whether or not you believe that his actions were legally justified. And I submit to you that no reasonable person would have done what the defendant did.
So he just told the jury that if you vote not guilty, you're not reasonable. Because all reasonable person would agree with me. Notice that little sly.
And that makes your decision easy. He is guilty of all counts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let's take a break and